Okay. I think we can make a start. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. Thank you for sparing your time. I know it's towards the end of the day, so we really appreciate you. And of course, we specifically chose this time because we've got members tuning in from the US, and because of the time difference, we had to look for a time that is convenient for all parties. So thank you very much, and thanks for bearing with us. Today, we're really excited to have with us a very important guest, a very important individual who's been doing a lot of fantastic work around anti-racism. But before we get into that, can I just very quickly just give a couple of housekeeping information. The first one is this meeting is being recorded, so please be aware of that. If you're asking questions and you don't want to be revealed in any shape or form, so if you've got any questions, then you can just type it in the chat section, and we will be very happy to ask that question on your behalf. So what we will be doing basically is we'll be listening to Matt, and then we'll be asking some questions around anti-racism and how we can sort of move this particular topic forward. And then after the sort of Q&A, we will then open up the microphone to the rest of the audience. So if you've got any questions, please do. You can use the raise hand button, and then you can ask your question. We just want everybody again to be aware that we are all on different parts of the journey in this anti-racism agenda. So please be very respectful of other people's opinion and ideas and also experiences. Please try and avoid, minimizing or invalidating other people's experience. We are a community of practice, and we are learning together. So there's bound to be some mistakes. So please be accommodating of that. I think that's it. There will be a survey question, just 3 questions really at the end of it, end of event survey, which we will share in the chat section. So please keep an eye out for that towards the end of this session. So that's all said. Again, a very special welcome to Matthew Johnson, the CEO of Race on the Agenda. We're very happy that you can join us today. I'm just going to tell you a bit about Matt, if that's okay, and I'm sure Matt will be happy to tell you more about himself. So he's an experienced policy and research professional. He's worked both at the grassroots, which is the community and the third sector, and also at the sort of structured levels within government and also multilateral institutions. He's gained an extensive amount of experience, working with various NGOs, government and academic institutions, both in the UK and also internationally. And this includes, supporting capacity development in parastatal organizations in areas of, monitoring and evaluation. And of course, he's been advising on several innovative programs in partnership with multilateral institutions such as UNICEF. So we're really, really pleased to have Matt here with us today to discuss the topic of anti-racism within the learning education sector. So before we proceed, I think it's important to maybe allow Matt to sort of give us the sort of opening speech, and then we will then move on to the Q&A session. So again, thank you very much for coming to this event, Promoting Anti-Racism in the EdTech sector, where we're going to be looking at little changes, big changes. The question is, how do we go about it? So thank you very much, and over to you, Matt.
Yeah, thank you for that fantastic introduction. So I'm Matt Johnson, as Tunde says, I'm the CEO of Race on the Agenda, as formerly the head of research for Runnymede Trust, which is one of Britain's kind of leading think tanks. And Race on the Agenda is a membership-based organization which has about 3,000 members across the country. that works on sort of anti-racism in collaboration with communities, organizations, and a whole broad range of sort of policy stakeholders, as well as academics too. Yeah, as Tunde says, I have quite a broad background. Started off my kind of research career in the international development space, working in countries such as Namibia and Sierra Leone, in Tanzania, in South Africa, and Botswana with organizations such as the British Council, and then more recently, in the past sort of decade or so, had been working with uh, uh, more regional institutions such as combined authorities, parliamentary institutions, and most recently with think tanks and NGOs in the racial justice space as well. So yeah, this topic on tech always interests me, because particularly when I was working in academia, I worked with a range of academics on the human data interaction, and actually have a co-authored book called Human Data Interaction, Data Disadvantage and Skills, which was based, which we wrote about 3 years ago, published with academics from the University of Bath and University of Brighton as well. So yeah, it was a privilege to kind of come and have this conversation around technology and its interaction with race and different inequalities too.
Sorry, thank you very much. My microphone was on mute there. Thank you very much. I mean, it's very interesting, when we start to look at, the issue of anti-racism, and I think for many in many areas, this is not considered to be something that is, quite important. I think a lot of people don't see the need to consider that sort of anti-racism lens, when we look at, technology design and also technology deployment. And that's part of the things that we want to talk about today. So if I just start off with this first question, which is, when we think about racism, in what ways is sort of racism sort of entrenched within our society as a whole?
Hmm. So there are three forms of racism that is typically discussed. One's the individual level, second is institutional, and three is structural. Um, I think the one that gets probably discussed about the most in popular discourse is probably individual. And the words that have been said to different individuals, certainly that has reduced since people like my granddad came to the country. And when I listen to stories of the Windrush generation and my granddad that came into the UK, it's definitely still there. But that the walking on the street and hearing overt slurs on the street is not sort of a common experience for myself. It is still more common in certain areas, as we've seen with the riots last years, and for certain communities, particularly, that is an experience and an ongoing experience for different individuals and communities as well. But I think compared to the 1960s, that has reduced. In terms of institutional racism, that's more about organizations and institutions, and that is that exists within um, boards, within decision-making bodies, within governance, within the management structures, and it's not necessarily borne out in terms of a slur, but it's also can be um, cumulative effects of biases, or that impact people's outcomes, and and leads to different experiences of, say, for example, the NHS, or from or in terms of people's employment, or in terms of the criminal justice systems as well. So those can be quite subtle, but actually very powerful and everyday experiences in terms of institutional racism. And then you've got the structures, the policies, the laws, the legislations as well, which this is also what we kind of strive to influence, that happens at the more structural and systemic level. Um, Again, since 1960s, there have been, in recent decades, there have been strides in the right direction, but we also see that there are significant sort of loopholes within particular areas, and one of those definitely is within AI. And one of our concerns uh, I've raised on the agenda is also in regards to technology and the emergent form of technology. And we can see, because technology is moving very, very fast, legislation does not move very fast; it moves very slow, and that hence leaves a a real gap and a real risk for different racialized communities that can have further biases. So yeah, that individual, institutional, and structural, both very visceral forms. One thing I would also say is. Uh, Even though that individual, those name calling is again is the most visible and probably the most discussed. I think racism also a story, and it's a narrative, it's a discourse, it's an ideological kind of positioning, and for us, it is again influencing policy, but also influencing the story behind the policy and the narrative and and what people, the belief system essentially behind it. That obviously that belief system has a long history, but that narrative also needs a counter narrative too. So yeah, I'll leave it there. But yeah, that's how we kind of envisage how racism works in that kind of complex form.
That's really interesting because you did mention, three levels at which racism works: the individual, institutional, and that sort of structural level. And I like the idea of this sort of narrative, how we sort of um, use a sort of counter narrative basically to help people understand that, this is an issue that is worth, tackling. So my next question is around, we know that it exists, but why is racism an important issue to tackle?
Mm,
Um, why is that an important issue? Why should we care about it?
mm. Yeah, I always like talking about things in threes. So I'll give another three in terms of, so there's the moral case, the social case, and the economic case. So of course the moral case is that it's just the right thing to do in terms of people have rights. There's from a rights-based perspective, it's right that people have equitable and equal opportunities to thrive in society and are not held back by the various barriers. But there's also the social case in that this impacts the quality of healthcare. Racism leads to mental health challenges. It impacts the body in itself. It leads to more crime, uh, and it leads to sort of poorer educational outcomes. So there's a range of sort of social factors that impact our society, that impact our society, due to again individual, institutional, and sort of structural racism. But I think a less discussed case is the economic case, and I think the issue of racism is almost seen as something that purely impacts people of color, and it does have an impact, a direct impact on people of color and people like myself as well. But it also impacts society as a whole, no matter what race, no matter what race you are, essentially. A more racially just society is better for all of us. As a society, the Race and Health Observatory just put out a report about called the cost of racism on the NHS, which they looked at the increasing strain that racism can have on the exchequer, and how that actually impacts uh, the economy, as well. But we can also supercharge the economy through racial justice by increasing better opportunity, by reducing these barriers to labor markets, and to making technology work within our benefit, um, rather than against us, as well. So, and it also has generational effects in that it holds our society not only back today but also for our future. And this matters not only for us, in the room today, but it also matters for um, children who may not even been born yet. So it is really important to have a more cohesive and more unified and society for us all, really.
Thank you very much. That's really interesting. I like the sort of rule of three that you're applying here. You talked about the social imperative, which affects mental health and things like that. You talked about the economic imperative as well. And I suppose it's important for us to understand, how, although it's affecting, a few a significant proportion of the society. It is something that has a sort of wide-ranging impact on the entire society, and it shouldn't really be ignored. But it does seem like this tackling racism seems like a very daunting task. Is this something that only a particular group of people should be seeking to address? My point really is how do we engage others basically
Mm,
as collaborators or allies to address this issue, this ill in
yeah,
our
yeah,
society?
yeah. And I go back to the framing that it's that a more racially just society is better for all of us, essentially. That um it's within all of our interest, and actually you'll make everyone's lives better no matter what background you come from. So it's definitely not just for one particular group or people of color to join in this fight. And we look at the history of anti-racism that is always taken, not only black people, not only you know brown people. It's taken everybody essentially to with a with to really address it. And the challenges, as you're right, is daunting. It can be difficult, so it does need a sort of a combined effort in that regards there. But yeah, there are reasons. There is hope, and there is change that happens at a micro level, um, as well. And that the uh in organizations, sort of everyday, I think there's everyday racism, but there's also everyday anti-racism within institutions that might necessarily be a protest, and but they are happening within different institutions. And yeah, that involves people from all sorts of backgrounds, really. And it's important that it does.
Okay. Thank you for that. Actually, that's quite useful to know. I'm just going to ask a follow-up question, and this is around your work and your organization. And I know you're dedicated towards, achieving an anti-racist society and equitable. Um, um, so my question really is around, in your role, for example, or in your organization, do you think that we need more organizations such as yourself, or do you think that the work that you do, maybe you need more sort of collaborators, so to speak, or allies, in order to be able to sort of move the momentum in the sort of right direction? So what do you think is actually necessary? Is it both, or is it just you need more organizations like yourself, talking about these issues?
Mm, mm. I think from my observation and my experience, it is um, there's a lot there's a lot there. There's lots that's being done, but it is severely under resourced. So for me, the issue is around resourcing what's there, and of course, the more the merrier. I mean, if there's more organizations that want to, support this, and there are more allies that we can work with, then that's fantastic. But the perennial problem is underfunding, and this is not a new issue. This is an issue that has happened for decades. Essentially, I've got family. I've got my granddad who passed about 5 years ago. We just celebrated his achievements in society a couple of weekends ago. Uh, who just banded together and developed a really important sort of community hub for children and young people, and kind of led a kind of fight against anti-racism. But the thankfully that institution still stands. But I just think about if those efforts were really funded, really backed, particularly at the community level, the amount of children and young people that could have supported. But it was always a constant battle, a constant pulling away of funding. Thankfully, it managed to survive through community support, but there are many organizations that didn't, and that has fractured. That has led to a fracturing and a challenging context for the sector, particularly during this time when you've got the discourse, kind of anti-DEI discourse, and anti-discourse that kind of speaks around racial justice as well. So yeah, that needs to change really.
Okay, that's really useful to know. And sorry to hear about your granddad. And but I think I join everyone in celebrating the successes that he's had. And I think that sort of resonates with I'm sure it resonates with a lot of people, but it resonates with myself when you mentioned that sort of lack of resources and that sort of lack of funding. And that's something that we also see in academia at the moment, where there's a lot of restructuring going on, in many institutions. A lot of people are, being let go, and what you then find is that, those that are sort of working within this space, usually those sort of activities are the sort of first things that are sort of cut off. But I suppose it is something we just continue to hold our head up and just, continue to fight and do what we can. And that then brings me to this next question, really, which is how we, as institutions, how we sort of perceive this work. And if you remember COVID-19, I think it forced a lot of universities and institutions to sort of consider how inclusive their, teaching and learning practices and processes were. And we saw an uptick, in the word inclusion. And if you look at Google trend, again, there was a spike in the number of times the word inclusion was searched, especially in teaching and learning. But then after COVID-19, that number's gone down dramatically, especially in the UK. If you look at the UK figures, and that basically prompted me to think, okay, how do we design and center the messaging on anti-racism so that it becomes a sort of sustained lens through which universities consider their practices and processes. So it's not something that is brought about by external factors. It's something that is sort of ingrained into how we do things, so that we can achieve a truly equitable learning environment. So how do we design and center that sort of messaging on anti-racism, so that it becomes a mainstay rather than just a
Yeah,
side effect?
yeah. I think we live in a very, so, I mean, there are actors, particularly on social media, that um, have kind of thrived on division, on sort of racial division. But I do think beneath the surface there is an appetite for unity. There's an appetite for win-wins. There's an appetite, and most people, I think, are tired of the division that has been stoked up, particularly in media, on social media as well. So I think it is tapping into that. It's tapping into the why, tapping into framing the messaging again, also in terms of the win-win. That actually this is not. So currently the framings is in terms of zero-sum game. So it's about if you give to a particular community or communities, if you support them, then that means they're taking away from the majority group, from a different group, which is not true actually. You're in a sort of multiracial, diverse society. We're not going to get growth, we're not going to get productivity without racial justice within this country. We're not going to get a thriving NHS. We're not going to get a country with sort of with less crime without racial justice, or so. Yes, I mean, all that matters, and that framing matters, and that why is this important? That switch between zero sum game and need to win needs to happen. I think the talk around inclusion is important. So again, I love talking about things in threes. In our current strategy, um, and I've only been in post 6 weeks, but our current strategy that I'm bringing in is around respond, reimagine, and resolve. So I think inclusion is about responding to the system as it is. So the system as it is, it's about navigating that system. I think inclusion is about navigating, the currency, including into the current system. That's the responding. But I think there's also another level that needs to happen. And again, this is part of the framing in regards to reimagining the system as a whole. To what does a what does institution, what do structures look like that are more um, racially just, and that's a reimagination sort of conversation, not just a inclusion in the current. There is a need for inclusion, but there's also a need for reimagination that strives to develop a system where it's not just based on survival, but it's also about where we thrive as a society and as a country as well. So as again, the moral case is important, but that social and economic case, there's a messaging aspect that needs to happen, and I think it is about understanding the why really.
All right, that's really interesting. I also like the fact that you use the zero sum game, and I've always thought about this, where when you actually hear a sort of similar issue around immigration, where it's always considered to be, well, yeah, the resources being taken away from us if you give resources to those. And I think the same sort of a way where people think that if you start to talk about racial issues and start to put interventions in place, then that sort of takes away resources from other areas. And I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. There needs to be this sort of change in narrative, from zero sum game to a win-win. And I like that. I like that. I like that a lot. So yeah, so win-win. So if we then consider, for example, the EdTech sector, because as a community of practice, we are the Anti-Racism in Learning Technology, a special interest group within Association for Learning Technology, which is one of the leading and professional bodies within the UK. So if we consider the EdTech sector, for example, we tend to see a sort of neutrality or a sort of colorblind attitude towards software design and deployment. Because when you look at some statistics, we know that this sector is mostly white, where we've got around 90% of UK design workforce are white individuals, according to Office for National Statistics. And we see that, sometimes this does not usually engage the perspective of minoritized communities. We've been talking about AI because that's always been a big issue right now, because it's really impacting and upending, the way that we do things within the higher education sector. Um, and that brings me to the question around design. So we find that, okay, those that are involved in the design are not quite representative of the entire community. And I see that there could be an opportunity lost here if we don't consider the impact of that on the sort of technologies that we are sort of designing and therefore deploying into the classrooms, and how that can also have an impact on how we achieve equity and inclusion within those spaces. Now, the issue of representation, 90%, okay, of UK design workforce are considered to be or reveal themselves as white or identified as white. To what extent then is this a problem
Mm.
where
Yeah.
we haven't got representation within the design workforce?
Yeah, I mean, it is a key it's a key problem. I think as you know, things like AI algorithms, they do exacerbate sort of racial disparities in education. As you know, in terms of design phase, they're based on can be based on input on historical data into technology that can replicate pre-existing human biases that we that we that we see in society, and that they can model what we see. One, obviously they're trained to believe what they see as as accurate from a human perspective. So for example, predictive analytical tools in education use kind of data, statistical algorithms, machine learnings to to help educators to support students and on their academic and professional journeys. But these can also have biases in how they predict tools, and how they predict the future of kind of student success as well. So I think both in terms of the 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 access, in terms of exacerbating inequalities in regards to access to education, potentially into higher education as well. I think there's definitely a risk there, and I think even tools that are designed to kind of improve outcomes for students. These predictive analytics can often rate students as particularly from racialized backgrounds, is less likely to succeed academically. We've seen, cases that where algorithmic can kind of based on those historical factors, and kind of predict success or failure based on historical preference of students' identities as well. So I go back to the point that I made earlier, that technology moves fast, legislation moves slow, which is a real problem. I've spoken with legislators um, around this, and they're worryingly, they're worryingly um, don't know what to do. Essentially, they say they don't know what to do, but I think there is a conflict between growth. What they see is a conflict between growth and the growth agenda, which is obviously innovation. Growth and innovation go hand in hand, and the need to compete with China, to compete with um, to be competitive on a global basis through rapidly moving technologies and AI, and actual justice. They're seeing racial justice, and I think the worry for me is that they're seen as dichotomies. They're seen as conflicting, when actually they can be, that they should be complementary. Um, the more that you include more diversity within the design phase, the better the AI system can be as well. So it is a problem, because it's not going to, because when obviously used in the real world, in terms of real world cases, when they're used in context, they're not going to be able to um, provide real and predictive um, outcomes for racialized groups. So there is a problem with that because of it will exacerbate existing inequalities, and there's also a lack of accountability. Uh, a lack of accountability, a lack of transparency within these sort of systems, particularly within AI, and that makes it more difficult to challenge really when it's not really understood.
So then, what then do you think people like ourselves as a special interest group that want to see this sort of anti-racist change within not just the education sector, but also within the ed tech sector. Um, what sort of small steps can we take to become more effective in this line of work?
Yeah, so I think the key thing is collaboration. Yeah, I think collaboration is really important. This is the scale of the challenge in this area is significant. So yeah, and the scale of the challenge is not as much in the public discourse as it should be, and yeah, I think it's that joined up approach to address these those issues. I think there are kind of smaller scale issues that within universities. There's obviously the university networks, EDI networks, where this can be, and there are other things that can be done on the institution. But I think in terms of influencing legislation, in terms of influencing the zeitgeist around that, I think it's going to take a real ecosystem of academia, of policy, of civil society, um, and technology to really address this change. So I think collaboration, collaboration, collaboration.
Collaboration. That's really useful to know. Thank you very much for that. The question again around that is, I know it's a big issue and we need to address it. Should we be prioritizing, big changes over small changes?
Mm,
What are your thoughts on that?
mm. I think they are both important, and the as I say, even what may look like a small change, when it's viewed cumulatively, actually small changes en masse lead to big changes as well. So I think there is something around um, quiet revolutions and people influencing in their workplaces, in their institutions, um, on sort of networks. I've seen I've worked on the universities and because of with the coalitions of the willing to kind of influence boards and influence governance boards and influence um, through collaboration and influencing decision making and getting these issues on the agenda within different institutions and as well. So what is kind of seen as and there've only been maybe about two or three people that we've supported who have ended up um uh, you know, having real powerful agendas, putting at governance level that impact, thousands of staff within academic institution. So yeah, I think that I wouldn't underestimate the power of that of even just small groups in influencing wider wider change. But I think in terms of the bigger, so I think that work needs to be done. That work is really important. But I think in terms of the bigger change, that requires strategy, tactics, and collaboration, really. And those big changes require a coordinated effort. And I think that's about building um, that power base again through that kind of ecosystem of academia, um, policy, technology, and civil society as well.
Excellent. I mean, you've just mentioned something about that sort of um, collaboration, which is something you've mentioned, and what that sort of collaboration should be like. My last question, before we then turn to the audience, is around that particular collaboration, because when you think of us as a special interest group, anti-racism, in learning technology, I just wondered, based on your experience and also your expertise, what sort of collaborations or activities, groups such as ours, should be looking at, developing, to aid our mission towards anti-racism within learning technology.
Mm. Yeah, I think in terms of collaborations, I think there's collaborations um, with stakeholders who may not be who might not be in your immediate kind of community of practice, or your immediate kind of stakeholder group. I think, when I was working with different universities, I had a policy background, so my role was to increase the visibility of the work within policy spaces, and um, you, I think that I think there was opportunity there because academia does provide, and associations like yourself do provide a really interesting perspective on on this issue, but I think that can be scaled up through engagement with policy think tanks. And I think my observation is that it's a really beautiful, um, that the iron sharpeneth iron in this space. Certainly from race on the agenda, and on the edtech issue, we're very keen to work with associations. Like yourself, very keen to work with academia. We're very keen to work with technology institutions, with government as well. So um, so I think so definitely in that space. So I think tanks that have access to policy to have access to policy actors, as well, and are able to bring those agendas on the table, but may not have the um, who may not be focusing on this exclusively, or there may be blind spots in knowledge when we're speaking with policymakers and different and speaking on different strategic initiatives. So I think, yeah, those sorts of collaborations in think tanks with on government consultations on a range of sort of factors, is really important, really.
That's really useful. Thank you very much. And I'm glad you mentioned that you're looking forward to, working with organizations or associations such as ours. So thank you so much, Matt, for sharing all that nuggets of wisdom. And there are things that, I've sort of made a note of that we definitely will be sort of taking forward. So we appreciate that. Thank you very much. Again, so I'm going to allow everybody else to chime in now. And if you've got any questions, please, you can unmute yourself and ask. Or if you want to use the chat section, please do feel free to use that. Anybody happy to wants to ask any question at the moment? Right, okay. Chris has said something here. Okay, so Chris has asked a few questions here. First, he said he likes your rule of three, Matt. So here are his three questions. Um, uh, Question one is, how has the advent of AI in the last couple of years impacted discussions about anti-racism in education?
Mm. Yeah, I think on a range of factors, um, I think the advent of AI has, well, I see education not just purely within um, institutions, but also in terms of the everyday education that we get, the everyday education that we get both inside and outside of institutions. And as we've seen with algorithmic silos that happen, then I think I think AI and these algorithmic silos have led to um, an element of kind of closed-mindedness with some aspects, which hasn't allowed you almost get locked into your algorithmic world. For some people are quite comfortable in that sort of algorithmic. We keeps on feeding you, doesn't it? The AI keeps on feeding you. So I think the that has also impacted discussions around anti-racism in general, which I think also has implications for anti-racism within education, because I think those algorithmic silos have um, have made it kind of more difficult. It keeps on feeding a particular view of race and of racism, depending on what you click on almost.
Brilliant, thank you for that. Matt's second question is around, do you believe AI has made it easier to address anti-racism in educational settings?
Hmm. I think there's certainly a potential for AI to to be used ethically and to be used to support uh, you know educational outcomes and address educational disparities. And I think the issue comes down to inclusive design and better design. Um, there are definitely, and also yeah, there are definitely, but I don't think at the moment we're there yet, simply because there is that disparity in the design, and there is this slowness in the legislation, and then there is this eagerness for growth by any means necessary, as well. So I do still worry. I don't think it has made it easy. And I go back to my previous point that um, I think I see our education not just within settings, but also outside of settings. And I think there is a popular education that has made it almost more difficult to address within classrooms and within educational settings as well.
Okay, then would you then say that AI has made it more challenging?
To some extent, yes. I mean, on we all know on certain platforms, in terms of how the algorithmic um how the algorithm works can lead to particular silos, can lead to particular messages being pushed um, that are of one particular or that of one particular view, without much exposure, rather enough exposure to an alternative view. There's a work for educational institutions to there's a work for educational institutions themselves to counteract that. But I definitely don't think we're there yet to say that AI has made it easier to address anti-racism in educational settings. I think the likelihood that it's the reverse.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Matt. Um, any other questions or comments? Anything that Matt has said or that has been said, and you want to comment on that? That will be welcome as well. Yeah. Chris has said thanks, Matt. Times three. Um, any questions? While we're waiting for another question, I have a question around policy because when when I joined this special interest group, I had it in my mind that yeah, this group should also be leading around discussions around policy. But at the moment, I think we've not gotten there where we are actually engaging with policy institutions and things like that. Um, and I just wonder, based on your experience, what would you think would be maybe one of the first steps? And I'm hoping that this will also be a good advice for those that are working within universities on how they can also take meaningful step towards, creating policies that are relevant to anti-racist practices within our institutions. What would you reckon that we should do as a sort of first steps if we really want to talk about policy and get stuck into that aspect?
Mm. So I think there are there are pockets of of kind of funding and you probably know about some of this that I've worked with, for example, braiding Glasgow, who are looking at AI and racism and some of the academics there, and they're also again they're building some of these ecosystems between racism, AI, and a range of sort of factors, including in education, but particularly from the arts based in education. Um, so I think from a policy perspective, I think groups like yours could could advocate and could influence policy design. I think policy the way that for me that policy is being implemented is devoid of design. It's all about um, there is a competitive nature between the growth agenda and the justice agenda. I think that again that also requires collaboration. So I think that there are there are there are organizations that I'm linked with that my colleagues are linked with in the different sector that who already have the purview of policymakers as well. So I think yeah, we are keen to, like organizations like ourselves. I know our partners are are really keen to push this on the agenda in an evidence-based way and to build a critical mass in order to change the tide in terms of the inequalities that we see within this area. So yeah, I think the policy process will require again that collaborative, that networked approach to really advocate for policy change as well. But I think there are a range of things that are coming to mind sort of post this discussion about ways you could potentially do that and scale up visibility of this issue.
Kenji is asking, what was the group you mentioned in Glasgow? What are they called?
Braid in Glasgow. So yeah, Braid UK. They're they they're looking into sort of responsible AI and looking at bridging divides between academic industry policy and regulatory work and sort of responsible AI. And I've been having some conversations with them around from a sort of racial lens as well. I'll put the link in the chat about some of the work that to give you some more information.
And thank you very much. Thank you. Um, Chris has said that it will be good to see the SIG promote more best practices, look into successful anti-racist policies and initiatives from other organizations, and this can provide valuable insight and frameworks that can be adapted to your own specific context. And I think that's really helpful. And thank you very much, Chris. And I think that's part of what we've been trying to do, Matt, again, is we've been trying to link up with other bodies. You mentioned collaboration. So we've been looking at, developing collaborative relationships with all organizations like ourselves, and we've been looking across the pond for this. But what we're also trying to do is to try and maybe sort of build this repository of resources that we can share, because we know there's a lot of activities going on outside the UK around anti-racism and how we can sort of learn from each other. And I just wondered whether, race on the agenda has, some of resources that we can also sort of tap into. So when we're having conversations within our various contexts, and we can sort of draw on some of those, if that will be okay.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one kind of vital resource will also be networks and the people and the experts that we have some linkage to. So I think one of them, yeah, just a few months ago, we've been working collaboratively with Braid researchers on some of these issues, and from research in Newcastle, even outside of the Braid network, in sort of Newcastle University, um, in Birmingham as well. So yeah, yeah. I myself have quite an interest in this, and happy to kind of share share those resources with the group as well. Yeah.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. Is there any other questions, any other comments from people in the audience? I wouldn't want to stretch it more than is necessary, actually. So in the absence of any further question or comment, can I just on behalf of the anti-racism and anti-racism in learning technology special interest group, can I extend a big thank you to you, Matt, for joining us today, for sharing, a lot of brilliant insights into your work, into your experience, and that's really been very helpful for us. And we've seen some ideas being generated, and so some signposting going on here. So really thank you for that, and we hope that we can continue this conversation. I definitely will try and continue this conversation with you and see how we can sort of and work together, and basically learn from some of the amazing work that you're doing as an organization. So thank you very much for your time today. I don't know if you've got any sort of parting words.
No, just as I say, thank you for the invite. It's always a privilege to have these conversations, to have these discussions. Um, yeah, and as I keep on saying, we're really keen to work collaboratively as well. We do have a member, individual. We have the free membership. It's free to sign up as a member, as race on the agenda. So where we also have access to resources, we have learning events. We're planning for more learning events ourselves around in partnerships with academics and policymakers on AI and race and AI. Coming up in the next few weeks as well. So yeah, feel free to sign up to any of that, and we're happy to share those resources with everyone. But yeah, wish you all fantastic evening, and I hope you enjoy the sun, what's left of it for today, and I hope you have a fantastic rest of the week as well.
Yeah, very much so. Thank you so much, Matt. And as a special interest group, can we also join as a group,
Oh yes, you
not
can
just as
definitely.
individuals? Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh,
for sure.
okay.
Yeah.
All right. Brilliant. Thank you very much again. Thank you for your time, and hope you enjoy the rest of your day. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Hopefully, we'll catch you at the next event. But until then, hope you take advantage of this lovely weather. Well, somebody said that it might snow next week, but maybe it might be in a different part of the UK. But we'll see. We'll see what happens. So thank you for coming, and I will see you next time.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye. Bye, everyone.